Cruz tried to belittle Crockett's law degree. She fired back with a career-ending line. Ted Cruz had spent years building his legend as the relentless Senate interrogator, a man who could reduce witnesses to ashen silence with little more than a smirk and a barbed question. But on this particular day, beneath the blinding lights of a packed Judiciary Committee hearing, the Texas senator prepared to launch what he was certain would be a career-defining evisceration, only to be confronted with the one opponent he wasn't ready for, Congresswoman Jasminecrockett. In that moment, as every camera turned its gaze and millions watched online, fate twisted. What was supposed to be Cruz's latest display of dominance became one of the most electrifying reversals in political memory, a live, televised reckoning that would send shockwaves far past the marble walls of the Capitol. The showdown had all the makings of classic Cruz theater: Ivy League swagger, practiced legal jabs, and the clear intent to expose a supposed rookie struggling out of her depth. He stared across the committee table, his reputation as a Harvard-educated legal mind glittering, his confidence palpable as he sized up Crockett, just a first-term congresswoman he presumed, destined to falter in the crucible of national scrutiny. What he didn't see was what everyone else would soon discover. Crockett was no ordinary opponent. Behind her composed exterior was a civil rights attorney sharpened by decades in the trenches, a woman forged not in ivory towers, but in the heat of courtroom battle and community struggle. The tension was electric, the stakes towering. Cruz, arms folded, delivered his opening salvo with that trademark mix of condescension and calculated intellect, weaving in subtle digs at Crockett's credentials and education. Cameras captured every twitch of his lips, every glint of superiority. The trap was set. The spectacle was in motion, but while Cruz relied on pedigree and bluster, Crockett relied on preparation, a quiet, coiled confidence that said she knew more about her adversary than he did about her. Unknown to Cruz, she had dissected his playbook, charted every rhetorical trick, and rehearsed every possible attack line. For every snide remark about university rankings and legal experience, she had a sharper, more personal retort ready. In those vital opening seconds, it seemed like another familiar Cruz demolition was about to begin. But as the senator pressed, dismissing her background with a well-timed laugh that echoed across the hearing room, something changed in the air, an energy that even veteran reporters couldn't ignore. Crockett's composure grew steelier, her replies more precise. With each exchange, the myth of Cruz's invincibility began to unravel. He cited his Supreme Court cases. She countered with win rates and frontline victories. He brandished Harvard. She weaponized raw percentile scores and the everyday reality of fighting for the marginalized. The mask slipped, his confidence flickered, and suddenly it was the senator, not the congresswoman, who looked exposed. Those who have watched Capitol Hill's rituals for years caught on in real time. Viewers on social media, journalists, and even rival senators began trading messages. Something special was happening. By the time Crockett turned Cruz's proudest legal moments against him, questioning not just his knowledge but the very foundation of his political persona, the energy in the room tilted. The world outside responded in a viral roar. Hashtags exploded, the showdown's clips rocketed into trending territory, and thousands of viewers started dissecting the face of a humbled heavyweight. What began as a routine hearing now pulsed as the most viral takedown on the internet, one that blurred Paulite, Ikes with pure, unfiltered drama. For Cruz, it was supposed to be just another soundbite win. For Crockett, it became the ultimate reversal, a statement that preparation can triumph over privilege, and that grit, not credentials, decides who wins on the biggest stages. As millions debated what they'd witnessed and experts rushed to analyze every detail, one question echoed. Had Ted Cruz's bravado finally met its match? In a single perfectly televised confrontation, Congresswoman Jasminecrockett didn't just answer, she rewrote the rules. Every corner of the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room pulsed with anticipation, a pressure cooker about to boil over. The walls, lined with stoic portraits and restless journalists, seemed to close in as senators filtered to their seats, staffers darted between tables, and television crews jockeyed for the best camera angle. Ted Cruz entered the chamber with that unmistakable aura of self-assurance, his signature swagger on full display. His navy blazer was as crisp as his reputation, every gesture carrying the weight of a seasoned debater who'd made a career out of cutting down opponents before a rapt national audience. Cruz paused at the threshold, surveying the crowd, and flashed that deliberate, knowing smile, the one that said he relished the spectacle about to unfold. You could feel the room tightening as Cruz took his place, his every motion suggesting a man entirely at ease in the spotlight. He shuffled a stack of color-coded notes with theatrical precision, glancing at reporters as if daring them to anticipate the fireworks. His fellow Republicans nodded in subtle solidarity, exchanging quick, confident murmurs. Even his political rivals couldn't look away, conscious that Cruz's cross-examinations weren't just hearings. They were headline-making performances. And today, with television lights white-hot and social media already bracing for viral clips, Cruz seemed to rise to the occasion, radiating the certainty that he was about to add another highlight to his storied record. But beneath the surface bravado, there was another current at play. Staffers whispered about the witness, Jasminecrockett, the first-term congresswoman from Texas, poised at her table across from Cruz. She appeared calm, almost serene, but her eyes tracked every move around her with quiet intensity. Senators hurried to review background briefs, keenly aware that this wasn't just another legislative skirmish. Crockett's name had already sent ripples through political circles, her reputation as an unflinching civil rights attorney preceding her. But in this auditorium of power and ego, most presumed she would be yet another foil for Cruz's practiced retorts. Cruz, meanwhile, leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled in that familiar posture, at once relaxed and poised to strike. His smirk betrayed unwavering confidence, a man rehearsing punchlines he expected to deliver with devastating clarity. The senator's Harvard credential echoed with every word, every sidelong glance an unspoken reminder of the intellectual sparring partners he'd felled in past hearings. The ritual dance of Washington power, status, spectacle, and strategy all seemed to converge on Cruz's persona. Camera lenses zoomed in, microphones hot and waiting, amplifying the tension to an almost cinematic degree. Across the country, viewers settled in, the digital commentariat sharpening their takes in real time. Twitter brimmed with speculation. Would Cruz once again outmaneuver his adversary? Was this the moment a young congresswoman found herself outmatched amid the Senate's old guard? Every eye in the room flicked between Cruz and Crockett, as if watching the prelude to a heavyweight bout, knowing something seismic was about to break. A hush fell as the hearing was given order. The first words were lost to the crackle of expectation, the collective sense that this was no ordinary policy debate. It was power set to poetry, calculations set to collide with lived experience. Senators huddled over their papers, a silent acknowledgement that whatever happened next would become more than just a matter of record. It would be replayed, relitigated, and remembered. The stage was perfectly set. Cruz, brimming with showman's confidence and the legacy of his Senate battles. Crockett, composed and unbowed, her demeanor a silent rebuke to every assumption swirling through the chamber. Somewhere in the back row, a reporter wrote a single word on their notepad: showdown. The air held its breath, the nation leaned in, and Ted Cruz glanced up, utterly certain that history was about to bend, once again, to his script, unaware that the next chapter would upend everything even he believed about political power. While the Senate chamber pulsed with the theater of political power, Jasminecrockett sat quietly at the witness table, the only sign of nerves a steadying breath as she unfolded her notes. To the casual observer, she might seem outmatched, a first-term congresswoman facing down a famously combative senator under the glare of 100 cameras. But beneath that calm exterior was a life marked not by privilege, but by tireless grit and defiance against odds. Born and raised in Dallas, Crockett didn't inherit opportunities. She earned them, climbing through public schools and waiting tables to pay her way to Rhodes College, then grinding through late nights at the University of Houston Law Center. Where Cruz's path wound through Ivy League cloisters, hers ran through classrooms packed with students working 2 jobs, through city courts besieged by broken systems, through communities wrestling with every challenge the law could throw at them. Before she ever set foot in Congress, Crockett had made her name far from the marble halls of Washington, fighting legal battles that never made headlines but changed lives all the same. She'd spent nearly 2 decades as a civil rights attorney, logging untold hours in humid courtrooms defending clients against police brutality, standing up for disenfranchised voters, and arguing for those whose voices were too often drowned out in the roar of state power. Every victory came at a price: long nights, threats from powerful institutions, and the loneliness of standing up when everyone expected her to back down. Her record bore the scars of real struggle: 47 federal civil rights cases tried, 43 won, each verdict representing not a statistic but a family kept whole or a right preserved against erasure. That history of hard-fought wins didn't just define Crockett's reputation, it defined her approach to preparation. For weeks before this hearing, she'd pored over Ted Cruz's legal record, dissected every grandstanding question, and mapped out every avenue of attack the senator was likely to take. Where Cruz trusted his instincts and the muscle of his reputation, Crockett trusted the discipline of research and the insights earned from a lifetime of underestimated ambition. Her notes weren't just pages of legalese. They were annotated reminders of every constituent whose right to vote she'd defended, every loophole she'd closed that let injustice linger, every policy speech she'd delivered from the floor of her district's community centers. To her, this was more than a debate on Senate procedure. It was a stand for every person who'd been told to stay in their place. And yet, Crockett refused to let the gravity of the moment turn personal determination into resentment or defensiveness. Her story wasn't one of resentment against the privileged. It was a steadfast commitment to the idea that the law could and should shield the vulnerable, if only those holding power remembered why it existed. When she watched Cruz spin anecdotes about his Supreme Court victories and pedigree, her mind didn't race with envy, but with strategy. She recalled mentors who'd told her the real trials weren't the ones in law school seminars, but the ones fought in neighborhoods dismissed by the very people holding office. Years of advocacy had taught her that arrogance, more than anything, signaled a weakness, a gap between image and substance. This duel wasn't just politics or spectacle for Crockett, it was personal. The very voting laws under scrutiny in this hearing threatened the rights of people who looked like her, hailed from the same zip codes, spoke the same out-of-fashion dialects still dismissed in polished Senate halls. Unlike most of her colleagues, she'd seen the impact of voter suppression not in think tank reports, but in hollowed-out polling places and the anxiety on her neighbors' faces each election cycle. When Senator Cruz looked down on her credentials, he wasn't just challenging her degree, he was insulting everything and everyone that fueled her career. As the hearing began in earnest, all of this, decades of resolve, casebook scars, and lived empathy, sat beneath her composed exterior. For viewers across the country, and especially for those who too often saw themselves reflected only in the margins of American power, Jasmine Crockett was instantly both relatable and formidable, a challenger who could meet the system's arrogance not with anger, but with the kind of calm, iron-willed preparation that can upend the rules of power and inspi. Ira following long after the last gavel falls. Ted Cruz relished this. The spotlight, the tension, the expectation that he would once again outmaneuver his opponent with little more than a clever barb and a knowing smirk. As the committee chair introduced the topic, voting rights and alleged suppression, Cruz seemed almost to bask in the fluorescent glow of the cameras. He leaned forward with practiced poise, his expensive pen balanced between his fingers, scanning his color-coded notes as though rehearsing the win before it even began. His opening remarks dripped with condescension, his words painstakingly polite, yet laced with patronizing undertones. "Congresswoman Crockett," he said, his voice slowed for effect, "I appreciate you making time for us today. I know being a first-term member must keep your schedule rather occupied." The comment hung in the air just long enough for the Republican senators to trade approving glances, and just sharp enough for viewers at home to detect the subtle sting. To Cruz, this was more than mere theater. It was ritual. The credentials flex, the rhetorical trap, the sense that he could belittle by proximity alone. He referenced his Harvard Law pedigree and Supreme Court clerkship in the early minutes, stacking each accomplishment like a wall between himself and the Congresswoman from Dallas. Every eye in the hearing room tracked his performance. Democratic senators bristled, but the Republican side, well acquainted with this act, wore thin smiles as Cruz circled repeatedly back to his resume. He pressed on, artfully diminishing Crockett's alma mater, the University of Houston Law Center, a fine regional school, of course, making it clear that, in his view, the true stewards of constitutional wisdom hailed from Ivy Halls. "These are, frankly, complex constitutional matters," he asserted with breezy confidence, "and should be left to those with experience at institutions like Harvard, or, for that matter, those who have argued before the highest court in the land." Cruz's condescension was more than rhetorical flourish. It was a shield, a way of asserting dominance by framing every exchange as intellectually lopsided before the debate had even begun. The performance was seamless. Cruz's measured voice, his catalog of credentials, and the pointed laughter he couldn't quite suppress when discussing the seriousness of Crockett's legal arguments. He even found space to gently mock her for taking issue with Texas's voting laws, a reminder, he implied, that she was out of her depth. From beneath the bright lights, he glanced at his Republican allies, searching for subtle nods of approval each time he upbraided her qualifications. The message for anyone listening was painfully clear. Experience, at least as Cruz defined it, wasn't something you could earn in a courtroom fighting for civil rights. It was something certified by brand-name diplomas and proximity to power. Yet, with every flex of his resume, the audience's frustration grew. On social media, viewers began to trade comments about Cruz's arrogance, dissecting his every snicker and sigh. In the hearing room itself, Democrats' discomfort became palpable as they exchanged uneasy looks, a tacit acknowledgement that Cruz was playing the oldest game in Washington, mistaking privilege for merit, performance for substance. Crockett, meanwhile, remained outwardly composed, her patience as much a rebuke as any counterargument. By building the entire confrontation around his own perceived superiority, Cruz did more than set a trap for his opponent. He set one for himself. The senator, so certain of his status and so comfortable with his upper hand, was blind to the growing energy in the room. With each passing minute, the dynamic shifted. Gone was the expectation of an easy Cruz victory, replaced by a palpable hunger for true confrontation, a sense that the nation was waiting for someone to puncture his arrogance and return fire. In the performance of his credentials and the thinly veiled dismissals, Cruz stoked an anticipation for payback, and as viewers leaned closer, eager for the tide to turn, the stage was set not just for a policy debate, but for a reckoning that would reverberate far beyond a single Senate hearing. Cruz's confidence radiated as he unleashed his first volley, dismissing Crockett's credentials with a smirk that seemed carved from marble. His voice dripped with mock courtesy as he recited Harvard anecdotes, Supreme Court victories, and the well-worn refrain that constitutional questions should be left to those who've actually studied at the top. The Republican side of the room shifted forward, eager for the predictable rout. But Crockett didn't blink. Instead, she listened in silence, letting Cruz's arrogance fill the room like gas before the spark. And then, with a calm cultivated over decades in adversarial courtrooms, she struck. "You mentioned the Texas bar," she began, her words unhurried but landing with the weight of an anvil. "You passed it on your first try, so did I. But, Senator, I scored in the 95th percentile. I believe you were on the 7th. The silence that met her words was total. For an instant, even the cameras seemed to pause. Cruz's mask flickered, the certainty in his eyes twisting into confusion. Undeterred, Crockett pressed the offensive. "You're proud of your Supreme Court record. 5 wins, 4 losses. That's 55%. I've argued 47 civil rights cases, won 43. That's a 91% success rate. But here's the difference, Senator. I had to fight with no institutional backing, no state machinery behind me, just facts, preparation, and my client's hope." Cruz's hand, once steady, fidgeted with his pen. Each new fact wasn't just a rebuttal. It was an unmasking. Then came the masterstroke. "But let's talk about your most infamous Supreme Court moment," she said, locking eyes with Cruz. "Texas versus Pennsylvania. You argued essentially that millions of ballots should be thrown out based on a legal theory so flimsy the Supreme Court wouldn't even grant a hearing. They dismissed it in one sentence, Senator. After all that Harvard training, they told you, with breathtaking brevity, that you didn't even have a case." The hearing room was stunned. Even Cruz's allies looked away, unwilling to meet his gaze as Crockett read aloud. Texas has not demonstrated a judicially cognizable interest in the manner in which another state conducts its elections. Crockett's voice rose. Do you know what that means, Senator? It means the highest court in the land, in a single devastating sentence, dismissed your argument as incompetent. Not wrong, not controversial, but simply lacking any valid legal interest. Senator, that's a lesson in federalism most law students learn in their first year. Cruz tried to protest, but Crockett cut him off, lifting a copy of the Supreme Court's order like an exhibit before the jury. Each delivered fact carried with it a deeper wound, to Cruz's resume, to his image, and to his irrepressible self-belief. She cited legal precedents where she'd defended voting rights under the 14th Amendment, where she'd won injunctions against discriminatory polling place closures without the benefit of a state attorney general or a media spotlight. You rely on pedigree, Senator. I rely on preparation. As Crockett finished, the hearing room sat in shocked fixation. Cruz, the man who turned intimidation into political currency, found himself speechless, his knuckles white around his pen, his eyes darting for rescue that wouldn't come. The aura of Harvard faded as the reality of defeat sank in, and the world outside, watching in real time, knew that in the crucible of fact, privilege alone could not survive. The takedown wasn't just clinical, it was complete. The instant JasminecRockett's forensic takedown of Ted Cruz ignited in the Senate chamber. Shockwaves tore through every corner of social media, the digital world erupting in real time as millions watched, dissected, and relived the moment. On Twitter, the hashtag #CruzDestroyed trended globally within minutes, propelled by side-by-side meme videos juxtaposing Cruz's smug entrance with his stunned, speechless exit. One clip collected over 2.3 million views in its first hour alone. Edits cropped up across TikTok faster than moderators could flag them. Dramatic remixes set Crockett's best one-liners to pounding orchestral soundtracks, or slowed Cruz's dawning realization into meme-worthy zooms and freeze frames, with the most popular horror movie trailer spoof notching 15 million views in a single day. 12. Meme factories immediately weaponized Cruz's shifting expressions, with Instagram awash in side-by-sides labeled Constitutional Scholar versus Cancun Coward, each image racking up hundreds of thousands of shares as users riffed on the notion of Harvard bluster meeting Texas steel. Viral commentary stretched far beyond silly memes. YouTube exploded with live breakdowns and emergency roundtables as political junkies and expert analysts alike rewound the confrontation frame by frame, calling it the most thorough political evisceration in years. CNN ran breaking news banners about the Senate showdown gone viral, while even traditionally conservative outlets like Fox News could hardly ignore the deluge of coverage, though many struggled to defend Cruz's now viral silence. Texas media outlets published scathing editorials, some even urging Cruz to reconsider his role as the state's standard-bearer, citing Crockett's fearless performance on behalf of marginalized voters. As the digital wildfire raged, expert commentariat flooded LinkedIn and professional Slack channels with takes. Branding consultants and political strategists dissected Crockett's preparation over privilege approach as a template for future debates, while legal experts lauded her use of quantifiable facts over credentials. Even professional coaches and HR departments circulated the clip as a masterclass in turning intimidation into decisive, facts-based rebuttal, an instant case study in power dynamics and resilience under pressure. Not only did left-leaning corners of the internet celebrate, but even some Republican colleagues expressed relief anonymously that Cruz's grandstanding had finally been called out so publicly. 3 major GOP donors in Texas withdrew their support for him within hours, while Democratic fundraising emails featuring clips of Crockett's performance raised millions in days. Meanwhile, Crockett herself was vaulted overnight into national prominence, her office inundated with messages of support and new speaking requests from media outlets and civil rights advocates across the country. The viral content slipped frictionlessly into every facet of digital life. TikTok users looped the confrontation with remixed soundtracks, beauty bloggers posted power outfit breakdowns of Crockett's attire, debate coaches reposted the exchange as a model for cross-examination. Even sports commentators likened her methodical evisceration to a championship knockout. On Facebook and WhatsApp, parents forwarded the clip as a parable about standing up to bullies, while Instagram featured carousel after carousel of Crockett's quotes, elevated to the status of motivational posters. In American pop culture, the confrontation left a deep digital footprint, not just a viral moment, but a viral movement, showing that when preparation meets arrogance, the story all but tells itself. When the viral Senate showdown faded and the hashtags ebbed, the repercussions still rippled, reshaping reputations and rewriting the rules of public debate. For Ted Cruz, the defeat carved deep. Once lionized as a conservative mythmaker and master of televised hearings, his brand of Ivy League bravado suffered a blow it couldn't simply shrug off. Media outlets, once eager to showcase his Senate theatrics, now covered his testimony with a new skepticism. Approval ratings sagged, campaign donors hesitated, and rivals, emboldened by his collapse under Crockett's fact-driven assault, began to challenge his intellectual dominance. Within his own party, whispers grew louder about whether Cruz's reliance on credentialed put-downs and practiced arrogance, long considered political assets, had finally become liabilities in a climate that now demanded substance over showmanship. Meanwhile, Jasminecrockett became the face of a new Democratic vanguard, her rise fueled not just by the initial confrontation, but by what came after. She was no longer just a local Texas success story. She was a rising national star, named among changemakers in major media, fielding invitations to keynote rallies and fundraisers across the country. Crockett's blunt, direct style, honed as a public defender and battle-tested in city courts, helped her forge deeper connections with audiences that traditional politicians struggled to reach. She soon topped polling for prospective Senate runs, her appeal grounded in the image of fearless preparation and lived authenticity, someone who drew strength, not polish, from her background in social justice and criminal defense. The Crockett effect became more than a catchphrase. Analysts and strategists began dissecting her method for others to emulate, urging would-be candidates to foreground lived experience, real numbers, and ferocious prep, instead of falling back on party scripts or elite resume games. Young lawmakers cited her Senate moment as proof that it was possible to reframe public discourse on their own terms, using facts and disciplined rebuttal to upend even the most entrenched political pecking orders. Political consultants, debate coaches, and even HR managers invoked the Crockett playbook in workshops about overcoming intimidation with preparation, using her example to inspire confidence in underdogs across fields. For those watching from the outside, her story became emblematic of a broader shift in American politics. A clarion call that in the post-2024 landscape, success was measured by who could best combine substance with strategy, not by who had the flashiest credentials or oldest connections. As Crockett herself reflected at a conference, the law and the truth doesn't care where you went to school or how many headlines you claim. All that matters is what you can prove and the courage to prove it when the pressure's on. If there's anything the nation took from that seismic Senate clash, it was this: grit means everything on the grandest stages. Preparation can outshine privilege, and real power belongs to those willing to do the work, speak the truth, and stand in the spotlight unafraid, no matter which way the cameras are pointing. If Crockett's meteoric rise marked a turning point in American political theater, it also marked a turning point for how voices like yours, prepared, principled, unafraid, could shape what comes next. So, if you believe that preparation and integrity should trump arrogance and entitlement on the biggest stages, now's the time to make your voice count. Share this story, subscribe for more deep dive breakdowns of moments that change the game, and drop a comment with your take. Who do you want us to spotlight next, and what lessons do you see for the future of public debate? Hit that notification bell to make sure you never miss the moments that redefine power, and be a part of the conversation that's rewriting the rules for good.